You're watching Capital Conversations with Congressman Mike McIntyre, an opportunity for the people of Southeastern North Carolina to get an inside look at the issues facing the nation and the U.S. Congress. I invite you to see how your community is affected. Now, from Washington, D.C., here's Congressman Mike McIntyre.
Welcome to Capital Conversations. I'm Mike McIntyre, your congressman from here in Southeastern North Carolina, and this program is a part of our ongoing effort to keep you informed about our work in Washington and how it affects you. I'm here today with Jo-Ellen Darcy, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. In other words, she's the top-ranking official in the entire federal government for coastal and waterway infrastructure and oversees the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, an organization many of which you are familiar with and which is of vital importance to our region. Today we're going to talk about the work that needs to be done to ensure that our coastal communities remain strong and vibrant centers of economic activity. We'll also talk about some of the difficulties facing our coastal communities and how Secretary Darcy and I are working together to maintain the navigability and safety of the Wilmington Harbor and making vital investments in our infrastructure here on the coast. You know, from spending by beach visitors to having folks come and enjoy this beautiful part of North Carolina, we know the difference it makes with regard to revenue and to payroll dollars. The numbers are sound and strong for what the North Carolina coast means, particularly in our area of Brunswick, New Hanover, and Pender counties. In fact, in 2009 alone, there was nearly $354 million in economic activity generated for tourism just in Brunswick County, which supported over 4,500 jobs. There was $390 million in economic activity generated in New Hanover County, the Wilmington area, which directly supported 5,200 jobs. And there was over $67.5 million in economic activity generated in Pender County to support almost 1,000 jobs. Secretary Darcy, my friend and partner in the effort to ensure strong coastal communities and throughout the United States, was appointed by the President in August of 2009 to serve as the chief official overseeing the civil works of the United States Army. She hails from the coastal state of Massachusetts and grew up in Fitchburg, and she is a widely recognized expert on water resource and conservation policy prior to her current appointment. She served as a senior policy advisor to the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. As Assistant Secretary for Civil Works, Ms. Darcy establishes policy, direction, and provides supervision of the Department of the Army functions which all relate to the various aspects of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works program. This includes reimbursable work performed on behalf of the federal and non-federal entities that are involved. And these responsibilities include programs for conservation and the development of the nation's water and wetland resources, flood control, navigation, and shore protection. Secretary Darcy, thank you for being with us today and joining us here on Capital Conversations. We're so glad to have you. I know that you know our part of North Carolina. The coastal area is not only a wonderful blessing that the good Lord has given us to enjoy in the environment, but it's also a great economic incentive for us to do the right thing by the coast. And as I often say to folks back home, it's both an economic engine and an environmental treasure. And on both scores, we want to do what we can to take care of our beaches and our coastal areas and protect the wonderful part of North Carolina that we enjoy. I know you've had a chance to come down there and visit and see for yourself how important the coastal area is, and with Easter weekend having just recently passed and now the springtime is here and the warm weather and we look ahead to the summer, we know tourism season's officially begun, and we know now more than ever people are once again looking at, well, what's going to happen to our beaches? What is going to happen to these shallow draft inlets where the Coast Guard uses for public safety, and that are we going to be able to have not only commercial but recreational boaters, and the tremendous impact that has on the economics of the area as well. So I wanted to ask you a couple of things to start off with and let you share with us your perspective on the importance of your job, which we know is very important. Folks in our area know very well the Army Corps of Engineers play such a vital role in the maintenance of our beaches and of our waterways. Could you tell us and tell all of our audience the criteria that you and the administration use when you measure the value of a project and how you decide whether or not to include a project in a budget request that goes before the Congress?
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here today. You're right, I did get to go to North Carolina last September, I believe it was, and I was in the Cape Fear area and went up through the snow cut and saw and can attest to the beauty that you just described.
Yes,
but the President's budget is put together through a number of steps for our program, but where we start is at our districts. Wilmington District, for example, will make proposals as to what projects or studies or programs they believe should be funded in that budget year. The criteria that we use is based on a number of things. Most importantly is public health and safety. We have an aging infrastructure, as you know, in this country, and many of our dams and levees are in need of repair, as well as some of our locks. So the safety issue is one of the ones that we put almost to the top of the list when we set our priorities for making choices. And each of the districts give us their priority list of what the projects they think should be funded. That also goes up through the division, in your case the South Atlantic Division. And then it goes to headquarters. Then with headquarters and my office, we make a proposal that we submit to the Office of Management and Budget, which is makes the final determinations of what the President's overall budget should look like. So our Corps of Engineers budget has to be looked and viewed as part of the President's entire priorities for the nation. And then at that point, we make a decision, and the President, the first Monday of every February, submits his budget to the Congress. And then now, currently, we're in the process of going through appropriations. I think the House subcommittee passed our appropriations bill yesterday out of subcommittee. And that's the process that will go forward in determining what our budget is for every year. But the way we select the projects, as I said, is first based on public health and safety. Most risk is what can we do as a nation with the money that we have to buy down the risk for people, whether they're sitting behind a levee, whether they're on the coast behind a storm damage reduction project, which you have many of those in your district.
Right.
And it's the safety aspect first, and then we look at all our other missions. We have not only a navigation mission, but the storm damage reduction and flood control mission, as well as aquatic ecosystem restoration. Those projects that we are doing that have resulted from previous Corps of Engineer activity that may in some way have been detrimental to the ecosystem. So we have those three mission areas that we have to balance within the money that we are allocated in the President's budget.
Yeah, I knew the first time we got to talk face to face, I mentioned to you then about the safety issue because we were very concerned about our inlets and the shoaling that was occurring, and of course Snow's Cut that you mentioned, and down near the Carolina Beach area, and Carolina Beach Inlet was a major concern in the question of how our Coast Guard can get out and help those who may be in distress and how lives could be at risk. And I know the Coast Guard was having to pull up buoys in certain areas along the Intracoastal Waterway and some of our inlets. And I know that's when you realize the seriousness of it before you even got to go down there. And we appreciate you're looking at that. We have 3 wonderful Coast Guard stations in our district as well, and they do yeoman's work in trying to make sure we are safe in those areas. Then, of course, as you mentioned with the shoreline protection, because we live in Hurricane Alley, we've had obviously great experience in dealing with hurricanes and know how important that is for the protection of those communities with shoreline protection. Can you speak for a moment about the difficulties that are involved in maintaining our nation's waterways in face of the growing pressure to cut government spending? We know there's always a balancing act going on, and how you, when you look at the projects, try to figure out, because of the constraints that we all are under now with government spending programs, what you do in terms of dealing with those difficulties and making your decisions.
In particular with the navigation projects, we look at the commercial use of a waterway. We evaluate the how much commercial traffic is there, and our definition of a high-use commercial harbor is 1 million tons of commercial traffic a year. And if a waterway has that, then it's considered a high-use waterway. So a waterway falling below that cutoff is considered a low-use commercial waterway. And as you say, in limited, with our financial constraints, we need to then look at how much we can afford for each of those other low-use harbors. We have, in looking at the low-use harbors, we look at the things that you mentioned, like does the Coast Guard need to get there? in order for safety reasons, and that would, in our looking at what projects to fund, that would be a criteria that would be very important in making a decision to fund that project. If again it's a life safety need, as well as some other commercial low-use commercial harbors provide subsistence fishing in some cases, and also provide other safety concerns, which would have them be able to compete better for the limited low-use commercial dollars that we have.
Well, what do you expect to see in future Army Corps budgets in terms of funding amounts? Do you think that you're expecting it to be about the same, to be somewhat less, dramatically less, or there may even be a chance there would be some more targeted funding in certain areas?
I think we're probably going to see about the same in the next couple of years. You know, last year the President requested $4.6 billion for the Army Corps of Engineers. This year he requested $4.7, $100 million increase. We're considered a smaller budget, even though it's a substantial amount of money. But that was an increase, and part of that increase is coming into harbor maintenance. As you know, the President has an export initiative that he wants to double exports by 2015, and as part of that, he's asked this year the highest amount ever from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund in order to continue to dredge and keep our commercial ports not only operable but competitive.
Well, and we were very pleased for the highest amount for the funding for the Wilmington Harbor, and we thank you for that. I met with the beach mayors for the last 16 years. I've done an annual meeting on the Thursday before Easter during the Easter recess, and have shared with all the coastal mayors and their town councils, and as well as the county commissioners and state legislators who can attend, where we are on our coastal funding and these water projects that are so significant. And they were very excited to know that we're finally getting the attention that we need in terms of that kind of money targeted toward the Wilmington Harbor project. And also that the importance of shoreline protection is being understood, and the shallow draft inlets, all of those that greatly affect our area. In fact, when we think about the need for those projects in our area, what is the thing that jumps out at you with regard to looking at the Army Corps of Engineers' critical role in that? Do you feel like that the Army Corps welcomes the kind of input from those local communities, and then you try to weigh, as I've told our local mayors, these are projects not of just local interest, but of regional and national significance, and that we have to make that case, because we realize in these tight budget times that we have to show that people from throughout the nation come to these very beach areas, to the coastal parts that are being so well utilized, especially during tourism season, so there's a big economic impact, but also with terms of navigation with regards to public safety, and the great impact that has in terms of a regionally, nationally significant project.
Well, and I think the communication with the locals is key to making not only decisions but for your region, but also for the nation. In putting the budget together, we have to look at the national priorities and look at things from a national perspective and making those selections. But you know, the fact that it's important not only to your regional economy but the national economy, that's a consideration that we have to keep in mind to make sure that not only is the coastal protection there, but those ports are open and being able to be utilized for the economic development and the vibrant economy for your part of the state.
Well, we've been, we know that the beaches are of incredible economic importance, as you said. In fact, the figure that we had was they contribute nearly $35 billion in annual federal revenues alone, and there are over 2 billion visits made to our nation's beaches each year, with the federal government collecting about $320 per beach tours for every $1 spent. I don't know of any federal program that gets that kind of return.
It's a great return on investment.
In fact, I've told folks that don't ever feel like dollars are washing away. In fact, if anything, not only a few $100,000 on the front side save millions on the backside when you have a hurricane, and we've lived through that and seen that, but also for every $1 spent to get $320 return is quite an investment that is paying off dramatically. And then we know it's the right thing to do with regard to our environmental stewardship and also with regard to obviously the economic benefits. When you look at the opportunity that you have in terms of making sure the Army Corps of Engineers is a good faith partner with these communities, do you have any suggestions or recommendations about ways in which the local communities, as they work with the District Corps of Engineers or work with your office, that you think it's important for them to make sure that the Army Corps of Engineers is aware of in terms fulfilling the mission of the Corps of Engineers?
Well, as you know, all of our projects have local sponsors, so we have to be in, I think, constant communication with the local sponsor and what their needs are. I also think some of the things, and in particular in the Wilmington district, that we're doing is in coordination for our regulatory program. We're informing people early on as to what the requirements are for getting a permit, and I think that if you know beforehand in thinking about your project, then you can better design and also in many ways expedite the consideration of that. In Wilmington district, we've also have this new mapping technology that's helping us in our regulatory program that can be available to the locals as well, so that they know where things are, where the wetlands are, where the any kinds of crossings that may be needed in order to develop a project. So I think as working with the Wilmington district and going to the district and making sure that you're talking to them early, I think is one of the best ways that we can not only continue a partnership, but in many ways expedite considerations that need to be made in order to fulfill a project need.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I do appreciate, again, as we said at the outset of the program, you're actually coming down to our area and seeing what the situation is, because we all know a picture's worth 1,000 words, and you can actually have the sense of exactly what's going on with regard to the coastal needs.
I want
to
come when I can sit on the beach and just drive by it.
and they're a wonderful place to be and to enjoy, and thank you for coming from the personally and professionally. It's obviously a great blessing. WRDA is the Water Resources Development Act, is another terminology that we use a lot up here, but folks don't always understand what is the WRDA or WRDA process, and why is it important that Congress comes together to pass another WRDA bill soon?
Well, as WRDA authorizes all of the projects and work of the Army Corps of Engineers. Water Resources Development Act in 1986 created a new cost-sharing regime for all of the Army Corps of Engineer projects, and since 1986 we've had several WRDA bills. The last one was in 2007, and what it does is authorize the projects. The 2007 bill authorized more than $23 billion worth of projects within the Army Corps of Engineers, anything from deepening a harbor to adding levees to new dams, any ecosystem restoration projects. But we, the Army Corps of Engineers, cannot go forward with a project or a study unless it is authorized by Congress, and WRDA is that vehicle. And as you know, the committee, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee here in the House of Representatives, is what's termed the authorizing committee, and it's that committee that has to take action on these projects through their committee process. Each committee sets up criteria as to what kinds of projects they would like to consider and hear from their members about what's important to them. Include that in a Water Resources Development bill. The committee reports it out, and then it goes to the House floor. House floor votes on it, and hopefully the Senate is doing something in tandem, or at least, if not at the same time, at least is thinking about doing it as well. And then, as you know, each House passes their bill, they conference. The conference is a compromise as to what the final bill will be. Then it has to get voted on again and then go to the president. So it's a process that we've done it since 1986 with the cost sharing, as well as with all of this committee action. And it is important for us as an agency in order to be able to continue our work. Right now we have more than 14 what we call chiefs reports, which are the reports the Corps does in order to figure out the economic viability of a project and find and identify a cost share partner. That chief's report goes to the Congress, and we have over 14 of those before the Congress right now that we will need to have authorized before we can proceed on that work.
Well, and something I know here on Capitol Hill we want to make sure that does get done. I mentioned about representing Hurricane Alley earlier, which does require protecting our beaches and the shorelines and fortifying them against erosion. Now that summertime will soon be here, and we know that in June, unfortunately, hurricane season officially starts and then rolls on until November. Some public safety officials find themselves preparing now so that we're not caught off guard later. Tell us about how, when there is an emergency or a storm comes through, how FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers work together.
Under FEMA, under the Department of Homeland Security, has a framework. It's with 15 different areas of responsibility, and the Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for number 3, and that's the infrastructure and housing response to a hurricane. So if there is a hurricane, we know that in response to that, we would be activated to prepare for any infrastructure repairs or housing repairs. And we actually, I think it was last week, actually had our first coordination meeting with FEMA, because it is, about to be hurricane season. So we work really closely with them, but ours is a response activity that's tasked out by the Department of Homeland Security.
Can you also tell us, when we talk about the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway in particular, we talked some about the beaches and the inlets and the Wilmington Harbor. Recently, the Army Corps of Engineers included over $4 million in their supplemental and emergency budget to maintain this important waterway. A lot of times, folks in our area like to compare it to I-95, which I'm sure you're familiar with, since that comes right on up here through Washington, as well as is the East Coast corridor for highway traffic, and that the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway serves a similar purpose for our coast with regard to navigation. Many coastal communities and the association that works on behalf of the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway talks about that it would take only $20 million a year to fully maintain a navigation depth for traffic, for barge traffic from Virginia all the way down to Florida, which of course would include the North Carolina coast, which seems like a pretty modest investment for a very large return in terms of economic activity, jobs generated. Can you speak to us a moment about the administration's view of the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway and its importance to commercial barge traffic?
It is an important commercial navigation route. We did put $4 million in, as you alluded to. However, earlier when I discussed the low use versus high use commercial navigation and how we evaluate the budget-wise, because of the comparative lower use compared to higher uses, that's why it doesn't compete as well for the limited funds. So the $4 million was all we could afford this year.
And with regard to each project you look at, that cost analysis is always something that has to be considered in the formula. And so as we work with our local communities and with our District Corps of Engineers office, that is something that is always subject to continual evaluation or reevaluation. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. What we call BCR, benefit to cost ratio. Every 5 years it's reevaluated. And in some projects it's 3 years, but every project has to be reevaluated every 5 years to see what the benefit to cost ratio still is, and whether continued federal investment is in the best use of the taxpayers' dollars.
I know that over a decade ago, I remember when we first were looking at the Wilmington Harbor project, there were 3 different projects. There was a deepening project for the harbor, there was a widening project, and there was a harbor maintenance improvement project. And we ended up working with our District Corps of Engineers to put all 3 projects together to first of all save taxpayer money by combining 3 projects into one. And then secondly, we knew that the sand that they were digging out was beach quality sand and could be used for shoreline protection for our beach communities and beach renourishment and restoration. And then third, of course, with the economic impact that it provided for jobs, with the work that was going on in protecting our beaches and making sure that our coastal communities remained viable with the economic impact they had, it was really a win-win-win situation for the taxpayer, for jobs, and obviously for our coast. And the Corps of Engineers was great to work with on that, and we're seeing the fruition of that now because we have a consortium of several beach communities that work together with regard to the sand management plan that they call it, protecting those coastal communities against erosion, helping with beach renourishment, and that storm shoreline protection, as it's called, to make sure that if and when a hurricane does hit, there is far less damage to those communities in inland, and we do save millions of dollars by putting a few preventive dollars of $100,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars, save the millions of dollars on the backside, as we said earlier. I want to say thank you for coming to be with us today and being our guest. Our time has gone by fast, but I know your work is continual, and our work with your office is continual year-round, not just during hurricane season or early in the beach season, but year-round on protecting our coastal communities and making sure our shallow draft inlets stay open and stay navigable. And we appreciate your office being so open to our concerns, our entreaties, and our requests. As I thank her for being with me today, I want to also say not only Secretary Darcy, but Assistant Secretary Lee, they and their office have worked with us. Their dedication and engagement to working with me and with our staff over the years has truly made a tangible difference in our coastal communities and throughout our region. To those of you who are watching who work so hard to make coastal North Carolina the special place that it is, thank you also for the work you do. because it's you doing the homework of how this affects our economy and how we protect our environment that helps churn that economic engine for our area and protects our environmental treasure. We want to make sure we continue to fight for our coastal communities and for maritime commerce. And if you have concerns about our beaches or coastal waterway projects, please contact our office so that if I or our staff can be of assistance, we'll be happy to do that. You can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter and make sure that you're getting the information you need about what's going on with regard to our important coastal projects, especially as now we come full swing into tourist season. Thank you for tuning in again to another edition of Capitol Conversations. This is our opportunity to share with you what's happening in Washington and how that directly impacts the folks back home and the concerns we have back in Southeastern North Carolina. We appreciate you watching and hope that you'll tune in again and contact our office with any further questions you might have about any projects concerning our coastal areas or any other issues you might have with the federal government. And once again, I want to thank Secretary Darcy for being with us. I want to thank the Corps of Engineers for your cooperation. We had $60 million overall worth of projects with the Corps of Engineers. I will say that our beach mayors and our coastal communities, when we shared that news with them, when you combine the waterway projects, the shallow draft inlets, and the beach restoration or beach renourishment projects, it was a very positive year in what have been very tough economic times. But we know that the return, as we said, for every $320 spent, for every $1 spent, you get a $320 return, is pretty amazing. So thank you for helping us think through those challenges and making sure that it does make a difference for the people of Southeastern North Carolina and for our nation. And God bless you in your work.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being with us, and may God bless you and your family.